good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be back. I was going through and counting the other day. I think this is probably like the 15th user group presentation or 10th user group presentation, somewhere in there between the admin days and just the individual user group meetings. So it's always exciting to share some of these new technologies. And I'll be honest, I actually learn a whole bunch when I go through and put together this material as well. So I'm really excited to dig in a little bit more on the Intune suite with everyone today and kind of give you a little bit of an insight as to how you can use it to potentially even supplant other tools that you might have within your environment. So while I do that, I'm going to actually switch my camera real quick because just for the sake of this presentation today, I added this cool new background. So into Teams. I usually don't experiment with Teams backgrounds that often, but I figure that this would be a cool one to do for the, the presentation today. Hopefully it is actually turned the right way. All right, so let's dig in and a little bit about me. Not going to spend a whole lot of time. I'm excited to have joined the user group board this year. Been at Concurrency for 8 years, and I've been in Microsoft consulting for over 20 now. Doing a lot of architecture, not only in the Microsoft 365 space, but also done a lot of discussions on Copilot. So not a discussion for today, but definitely seeing a lot of the interest out there in the community. When I'm not behind the computer for a technology perspective, I'm also behind other technologies as a DJ and then traveling the world. And I love food, which if you attend some of my presentations, you probably have seen some of that from a theme perspective. So got my socials, definitely add me on LinkedIn. If you ever have any questions after the outcome of this presentation, drop me a note. Always happy to answer. So in general, as we talk about the Intune suite, yes, it is an additional license to add to your existing Microsoft 365 suite of licenses. But as I talk to customers all the time, I got to thinking, how many other products are organizations using in that endpoint management space that are just additional SKUs or additional products or additional vendors that you're having to work with? And really, where is the Intune suite when it comes to being game time ready? And with some of the features and functionalities that I want to share with you today, and kind of those 3 core areas that we're going to talk about in a second, there's a lot of really awesome capabilities. There's capabilities that some products that you might have in your endpoint management suite are doing today. There's potentially some things that it's doing over and above. So wanted to kind of dig in and really share that with the audience today. And God willing, the demos will work when I get to that point of the slides. So it's always hit or miss when you're doing these live events if they want to cooperate. So I've got a lot of really good material in the slide deck. Happy to share it afterwards. Just drop me a link on LinkedIn. I'm happy to get it to you. But in terms of looking at those 3 core areas, how can we use Intune Suite to improve our application security? How can we improve our access to resources securely? And how can we improve our device operations? Those are those 3 core areas that we'll touch on. We'll touch on where that endpoint story is in the Microsoft space in 2024. And then we'll also talk a little bit about licensing as we get started in the presentation today. And then my favorite part of this presentation, I thought through, and you'll see this on some of the slides, what are some of those comparative products in the space that some of those names you'll probably recognize, others you may not even be utilizing them, but wanted to really paint that picture from a tooling perspective. So you've got some of these in your environment today. You can be thinking about potentially how that Intune suite could help you do more. So let's dive in and look at really Microsoft's endpoint story as it is today. Really at the core, even I would say before COVID, but COVID definitely was a big proponent of pushing things forward. How can our IT orgs support our growing hybrid and remote workforces, especially as more and more organizations are consolidating office spaces or no longer extending their leases in their office spaces. And so some of these tools, from a traditional endpoint management perspective, Intune has been around actually probably over a decade now, if I do my math right. And it's just continued to grow from being just a mobile management platform to a real endpoint management tool. Over the last couple of years, Microsoft has added support for everything from Mac to Linux and all of the mobile platforms, iOS and Android. So being able to manage these devices and also be able to allow those users to work securely and have it all within one single product. I can't say single pane of glass, but Microsoft in its management tool set is one platform that you can use for being able to manage all of your devices in each of these different areas, whether it's those remote users being able to manage their apps, leveraging their identities to manage those devices, and then as well being able to ensure device compliance. A lot of those really do sit solely around that story of making sure that you are adhering to things like zero trust, that you are doing it securely. And at the same time, being able to empower your administrators to be able to service your users adequately, no matter where they are, is very important. So that's how Microsoft has continued to build out their endpoint management story over the last 10 years, and to really talk about each of those individual technologies that really support that endpoint management story. You can see some of the traditional ones here for being able to do endpoint management. We had our traditional configuration manager, which I see less and less of these days, which is great. I know that was always a big thing for IT organizations and companies altogether, is to realize that Intune is game ready and it can handle all their endpoint management. That's happened very successfully for a lot of organizations over the last 5+ years in being able to really shutter those traditional configuration manager environments, and then being able to add on the value of Microsoft 365 to be able to integrate things like security and some of the tools that you get in M365. Coming up this year is the GA release of the Security Copilot, and being able to give us a better look at how we're addressing or even approaching security when it comes to our devices, being able to ensure that they're properly patched and they're adhering to like CIS standards, for example, and that all the CVEs that are out for different applications, hardware, operating systems are all addressed, and that your security posture is up to date. So that's taking that value of all of the analytics data that is being stored within the Microsoft 365 environment and being able to use that to help your IT admins work smarter. And then in the admin center, over the last few years, Microsoft's done a great job being able to take that device management story from that whole life cycle, from onboarding a device through autopilot, being able to manage the device and the management of the software and the configuration inside of that admin center pretty adequately. And then now taking it to that next level of adding some new features and functionality, from things like per application tunneling to integrated remote assistance to even certificate management, which is probably one of the biggest adds to that Intune story this year. Having that all as part of that Intune suite, it is very exciting with all of the functionality that that Intune tool and that single tool set can give you as an organization. So wanted to paint the picture of where things sit in the Microsoft stack in 2024. And then as we think about licensing, and this is where I want to come back to this at the very end to kind of talk about what that cost is. I know for a number of organizations, potentially that $10 per user per month cost can be a little daunting. But then as we start to think about each of these different areas, from what tools are we using to support our end users? How are we managing specific devices or special devices? How are we, or if we are even doing per application tunneling for our mobile devices? All the way to improved analytics, improved application deployments where you don't have to upload and package some of those really core applications that you find deploying in your environments. That is something that Microsoft has made much easier. To the whole security posture as it comes to your users and being able to give them the ability to elevate access to specific applications that may still live on their endpoint without giving them the local admin password, or even having to give them the local device administrator role inside of Intune, and allowing them to elevate access as needed for applications. And then the cloud PKI, which we'll talk about. I've done quite a few Microsoft PKI deployments over the last 2 decades, and it's daunting, and managing it is also daunting as well. So having that ease of being able to secure your end users from a certificate perspective and allow them to leverage that for connecting to things like VPN and wireless is something that Microsoft has made easier as well. So as you can see, the Intune suite covers a lot. And if you were to look at, okay, I've got my M365 E3 or E5, or maybe even Business Premium, some of those core features, if you wanted to add them individually on top of that, once it's kind of like with the traditional Microsoft adage, if you add a couple of the features, it's almost easier just to get the whole suite. It's kind of like that as well when you start to look at each of these capabilities and how they are as part of the Intune suite. So we'll focus on all of those products as part of this presentation this afternoon. So let's dive on in. Let's talk about that first area. Let's talk about improvements in application security and what the Intune suite can provide. That first area is in enterprise application management. So what is exactly enterprise application management? It's taking the Windows 32 catalog and that Microsoft store, that the new one that is based on WinGet, and being able to think about leverage some of those more core third-party applications that aren't Microsoft specific. So Microsoft, as of today, I think there's right around 100 applications. And now that this has gone into GA, there was some suspect that it's going to ramp up a lot quicker in being able to have a lot of those common applications. So, in looking at some of the competitors in that space, tools like Patch My PC and Manage Engine and NinjaOne and Avante are also tools that have the same capability. They do have a deeper catalog as of right now, but I expect that to shrink very quickly over the course of 2024. And really why this is important is because of security posture when it comes to applications. Microsoft, as you can see on the right-hand side, I thought it was really interesting that when they released their most recent digital defense report, 78% of devices have at least some application that isn't patched. And in some of those, they have remained unpatched for over 9 months, which, as you've all watched the news and you've seen different events from a cybersecurity perspective start to become almost everyday news, this is one area that it's very easy for admins to be able to address through tools, some of the ones that are mentioned here at the bottom, but now Microsoft has addressed that and is building that into their tool sets as well. So how do we leverage this new enterprise application catalog? So as of last year, we can see that the new App Store rolled out. Being able to find Microsoft applications has gotten a lot easier, not having to take some of those and package them or connect to the legacy store and go through that process. They made it as easy as it has been for mobile devices for several years now. Thank goodness. So now to be able to extend that further past the Microsoft apps and be able to look at some non-Microsoft apps that are available. As of right now, as I mentioned, there's about 100, but those were deployed by going to that same application deployment process, selecting the enterprise app catalog, and then being able to select through that list of apps. So we no longer have to create an Intune win package for some of those core applications, or even know what some of the installation commands are. Microsoft bundles those all together and just makes it to where deploying any one of these applications is about 4 clicks when you go through finding the app, setting it up, and determining where it's going to be targeted within your organization. So the big difference here that we have previously seen within the Win32 application packages is that concept of supersedence. And so as new versions of these applications are available, we're able to go into the Intune portal and be able to select to have those outdated versions upgraded automatically by having the enterprise app catalog handle that automatically for us, so we don't have to go through and find when that app comes out and have to package it and then have to roll it out. Because this is being deployed through that same mechanism as we would find for the application catalog, it's using those same mechanisms for ensuring that the updated versions are pushed out to those devices as well. So being able to supersede those older versions with newer ones as they become available is part of that strategy Microsoft has made with enterprise apps to ensure that these common applications that are being deployed are constantly staying up to date and reducing that risk from a outdated software perspective. And so being able to then go and look at the updates for Win32 apps, we're able to see what version is currently within the environment. And then as new versions come out, we're able to say, let's be able to automatically roll those out and have those other versions superseded and pushed out to end users. So it definitely makes that third-party application story a lot more powerful and managed through that same pane of glass that you would for the rest of your enterprise applications as well. Yes, you definitely a good question, David. Patch My PC has a much broader support as well as the other platforms. As I mentioned, I do see that gap closing very quickly this year as Microsoft is looking at, what are some of those metrics around apps that are deployed within their customer base, and then addressing those and making them easier to leverage within that enterprise application catalog. So that's one component of keeping your devices more secure. The other, it really boils down to at what point are your users leveraging just-in-time elevation to be able to open up applications that might require additional security. And so the privileged endpoint management story, from a tooling perspective, being built into Windows, not requiring, I was going to say not requiring an additional agent, but I'll get to that just in a second. But being able to allow users to elevate and self-elevate access to those apps and being able to have that auditability behind it and have that built into that single platform that is Intune is really flexible, and it's really easy to be able to actually roll this out to your end users. And then as you can see, there's a couple of names that if you're using PAM today, that you probably recognize. Beyond Trust and CyberArk are the two most widely known names in the space. And we'll talk about what their costs are in comparison to the Microsoft SKU here at the end of the presentation. In terms of, and this is where I caught myself saying that it doesn't use another agent, it actually does. When you push out the elevation settings policy for the first time to your endpoints, what it does is it actually pushes this Microsoft EPM agent. And what I found is very quickly after deploying it, or after the Intune management extension checks in with Intune and sees that applications are available, it does that installation automatically behind the scenes. So that way, the users that are being allowed to use PAM will have that underlying component available on their machine. And then us as administrators, as we are looking at what applications do our users potentially need to elevate. In this case, I used the MS Info 32 application, which was Microsoft's example as well. So I wanted to take that a step further to demonstrate how those rules are created. And as part of deploying that EPM agent and pushing out that policy, the settings policy to devices, it pushes this PowerShell module. And then as part of pushing that module, we get this new command to be able to look at the file attributes. So in doing that, we have access to the information on that particular executable, as well as the file hash. That's the most important thing that we take from the machine. We take it into the elevation rules policy, we put the file hash, and then we're able to define what type of behavior we want that user to go through to be able to elevate access to that application. So in this case, business justification, you can also request additional authentication required to be able to open up that application in an elevated manner. Those are some options that we have from an elevations perspective. Additionally, when you run this file attributes command, you have an ability to specify if you want it to export a certificate file. And that's another means of being able to look at that signature source, is executing that get file attributes command, taking the file hash, taking the certificate, and uploading that into the elevation rules policy. For the sake of ease in the demo today, I just had it where it was validating the file hash and not looking at that signature source as well. So pushing the settings policy, step one. Step two, creating your rules for the executables you want to allow your users. And you can have multiple policies based on different user groups and what applications that they need to elevate. And then from an end user perspective, that agent that gets pushed to the machine, what we see there now is any executable on the machine. If we right click on it, we have that ability to run with elevated access. So we can see here there's two differences, and I think the biggest one that I want to point out is if we are running with elevated access and that particular executable is not set up in a rules policy, we'll just see this prompt here saying that we'll be asked to verify our identity. We put in credentials and open the application if we have admin rights on that machine. So if we don't and we do that, then it's going to fail when we try to authenticate if it doesn't have a policy set up for it. If we do have a policy like we showed on the previous screen, and we want to allow that end user to run MS Info 32, we'll see a slightly different message saying that we'll have administrator access to that application. And all that's based on that policy rule that was created. So being able to elevate puts it in the end user's hands. And then from an administrator perspective, we have the ability to look at a couple of different reports. We have that ability to look at each elevation that's occurred on the machine. As we can see here, once we push that settings policy to machines, we then start to see where there are executables that are being run on the machines, and we'll be able to see if those specific exe files or executables are managed or unmanaged. So let's spend a minute, fingers crossed and toes for everyone. Let's take a quick little peek at what that experience looks like for the end user. I'm going to share out my Windows 365 PC here, and I'm going to close out a PC manager, just toying around with that. But as you can see here now, if I open up my File Explorer, I then have that ability to find that application. So again, here's the executable. And if we go here, we can see that run with elevated access will be prompted there. But now if we were to find our MS info 32, that's the one that we currently have the policy on. If we go ahead and run that with elevated access, we'll give it a second here because this is definitely not the most powerful Windows 365 PC, but we'll get this prompt. So from a business justification perspective, we'll say looking at PC info. And then what will happen if we say continue, it's going to ask me for my credentials. So I'll go ahead and put those in. And then once I've done that, give it a second, and then we can see that the system information opened right up. Now, from my example in the presentation, if we go into that command prompt and we do the same thing, it'll give us, it's just a slightly different message. Just say test for all intents and purposes. Okay, I mean, it's like it's good. I think for that particular policy for MS Info, I had it do both a credentials as well as a business justification. So from there, I'd be able to go into my endpoint security. It's a little different. It's not actually in reporting, but if I go into endpoint security and privilege management, I can then go into my reports and I can actually look at that elevation report based on the application. So from an admin perspective, we have that reportability and the ease of being able to access that. Now, while we're in here, you can see here, there's a number of, it tracked all of the different elevations based on that particular executable. So from an admin perspective, it can make things a little bit easier to see what are some of those common apps that your end users are accessing that run in some sort of elevated fashion, and then determine if we want to make those managed by a rules policy. And so since we're in the Intune portal, I wanted to take a quick second before we jump into the next category and be able to kind of demonstrate real quick what some of those applications are inside of the enterprise application list. So as I mentioned, there's about 100 of them here, but if we start to look at different publishers, we've got the Android Studio, we have some of the WebEx tools, which that in itself, I think I've seen a lot of machines have outdated versions of those different apps. We can see other applications like Foxit, I've seen on a number of machines. Some of the Microsoft tools that traditionally you would have to package, like the CLI on the Visuals C runtimes, Firefox, Python, Royal Terminal Server app, the different versions of Snagit, VNC, etc. There's a number of different non-Microsoft applications currently in the list that we can select from. And let's just say that we wanted to push out the Azure CLI. We select that package and say, let's move forward. Everything is already pre-populated in here. I can go ahead and just click next through each of these screens. You can see that it automatically even populates the detection rules, which are really nice. And then from a deployment perspective, I do add the application. It doesn't give us the ability to target it just yet. It has to download that into our tenant to be able to be used. As we can see here, the requested content is being prepared. So I can go through, come back a little bit later, refresh that, and then I can target it to my machines. So before we switch out, there are a couple of questions that I see here from an MSI perspective. So these are just strictly, I believe at this point, just executables that we are looking to allow the end user to elevate. A lot of that is built into the normal MSI exec process. So if we wanted to give carte blanche access to end users to run MSI exec, then I think we could probably allow that to run some of those MSIs in an elevated manner. Printers would be a slightly different story from a driver perspective. If you had the executable for those, you could probably add that hash in to allow for the end users to install, but there are definitely better mechanisms to be able to get those into the end user hands versus having them self-serve in those aspects. End user needs admin rights to use. No, they do not need admin rights to use enterprise privilege management. Just their normal user account should be fine. Elevating while offline, that's a really good question. I've not tested that scenario. I'll follow up in the chat after the session and test it out, see how that works. Otherwise, yeah, so the printer drivers, in some of the recent security concerns I know have driven different behaviors in printer management deployment. So that definitely is a good follow-up topic to kind of look at as a test scenario. So, all right, let's keep moving forward. Let's go back into our presentation. Let's look at the next section of where Microsoft is improving in the use of the Intune suite, and that is secure access to resources. The first one I'm super excited of. I actually got a chance to be in the private preview for this, so I've actually been using this since October, and yeah, it's definitely much better than your traditional PKI experience. Having to manage the infrastructure, to managing certificates and revoking, to having to manage templates and the CA renewals and pushing GPOs for enrollment and for cloud-based enrollments, having to deploy NPS, but getting the CRLs and URLs right, which I've seen a lot of PKIs that's one area that is very much a science than art. And then just devices and connectivity. How do those devices connect to the PKI, especially in a hybrid and remote workforce, without having to have things like an always-on VPN in place? I found this architecture as well on one of the Microsoft sites, and I've had to administer and deploy a PKI deployment like this once upon a time. It gets very complex, especially where it's structured to be able to support a global deployment, being able to have external root CAs available. A CA deployment can get very complex based on the size of the organization, and not having to manage the infrastructure, the network, the underlying software in itself is a godsend for IT administrators. And in looking at the Microsoft PKI solution, it's very straightforward. Within your tenant, all you have to do is deploy your root and your issuing CA, deploy a SCEP policy, and then really push your certs to your devices, whether that is your VPN appliances, your wireless appliances, then pushing the certificates to your end users. That's just a matter of pushing the issuing and root certs out, as well as having them do the enrollment. So as of right now, which they call version 1 of Cloud PKI, it really just hits on those core uses of ensuring that user and device certificates are pushed out and being able to support Wi-Fi and VPN profiles as well. So very lightweight, gets the job done when it comes to being able to secure access to those resources. And thinking about how Microsoft compares to some of the other third-party PKI solutions, there's a number of them that go all the way from a managed PKI to being able to just issue certs. There's the free SCEPman project that you might have heard of that essentially allows you to build a PKI in Azure with your Azure resources and gives you that same functionality. It's a well-respected community project, but again, part of that as well as how do you support it? What does that look like for your admins? Are you going to have a single admin that is the subject matter expert, or how easy would it be to just leverage Microsoft and their infrastructure to be able to provide that capability? And so we can see here
from the process of how that looks to an end user, how that works from a Microsoft perspective. You have your configuration in the Intune console for the PKI and the cloud services. And then for your end user, once those are deployed, they get that SCEP profile. They talk to the SCEP service, and then from Intune, they are communicating to receive those policies. So all of the communication happens by way of talking to that SCEP service, and allows you to avoid some of that other infrastructure that you might see on-prem with things like Indes or things like a reverse proxy. So looking at the configuration, as I mentioned before, it is a breeze. You create your two routes, your two CAs, you create your profiles inside of Intune for pushing out the issuer cert, the root cert, and then doing the enrollment. And then the enrollment profile is very straightforward. You take a specific server URL that Microsoft gives you when you create the CA, and then you put that into the enrollment profile. So as you're going through and then deploying that to your end users, their experience that they see is they go into their certificates, their local certificates. They're able to see that one certificate that is pushed out by that issuing CA. And then if I go into the certificate itself and I see, okay, where is this actually talking to in that Microsoft infrastructure? We can see that the URL where Microsoft deploys that to their pki.azure.net infrastructure for your specific CA. So we can see the CRL there. As we looked at the previous screen, we are able to determine kind of what the encryption is, 248, SHA-2, and then that is all tied back to that root cert as well that issuing authority pushes out. So now, if we take a look at the revocation, because there's always those circumstances where you're going to need to revoke a certificate, and being able to do that is actually really easy. So getting to Cloud PKI all happens inside of your tenant admin. From there, I then go into my issuing CA. I then am able to see all of the different, they call them leaf certificates that come off of that CA, but really these are all the certs that are pushed down to my workstations in my environment. And then if I need to revoke it, I can simply go in and click that button. So gone are the days of having to find the right issuing server in a Windows PKI deployment, hunting it down in the list that could potentially be miles long, which I've seen many of those, to just go in and revoke a certificate. It's very easy by doing that inside the portal. So that allows you to use certificates to secure your devices, and then being able to go through and also secure access to your environment. Microsoft has their tunnel technology that is essentially a VPN gateway that allows your applications on your mobile devices to have per app access to those. Or if you're even trying to push out, let's say, an internal web service that you want your users to go in through a MAM profile in Edge to access on their work profile, this does the job too of being able to give them access to those resources without having to have a VPN client on their machine. Asterisk. So if you are using Defender in your environment today and you're protecting your devices with Defender, you already have that VPN client on your device. So you're able to have that tunnel connectivity and be able to access your networks. In talking with customers, some of the ones that I've seen in the field, Cisco does it for their per app VPN, Palo Alto, Global Protect, VMware Workspace ONE. Those are some examples that I've worked with customers that want to allow that per application access to their network resources. And so again, just like the Cloud PKI, it simplifies accessibility to the environment. Yes, it does have a deployment of a Linux Docker server that you do have to use. for being able to have the connectivity. So I think that's probably the only big hurdle that I think organizations I've worked with have seen thinking about how they want to approach this per application access, and then being able to support environments. They can be managed or unmanaged. So, but they would have to have the that tunnel client on their machine to be able to access their environment. Couple of questions I'm seeing. I'll go ahead and answer those real quick. To use Cloud PK with non-Intune managed devices, if they have a way, if you are able to push a SCEP profile to those Mac devices or any other managed device, those are supported. So I've tested it with Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. So as long as they're Intune managed, they can do that. To be able, as of right now, there's no, I would say, offline enrollment capabilities available for the Cloud PKI. All that is rolling through Intune at this current time. Offline routes, now that is something that Microsoft does support. If you have your own offline route, you can bring that certificate to the PKI. That is something that I believe is supported in version 1. I'd have to go double check, but I believe I remember seeing that in the documentation that is something that is supported. And then for Defender, good question. You should be able to, I think 1 is probably the minimum for Defender, but keep in mind, Tunnel is its own license that you will have as well. So in that, whether you get Tunnel individually or if you get it as part of the suite, that's the component that you will want to use. So if you're not using Defender in your environment, you should be able to just use that Tunnel license to provide that VPN connectivity. So we took a look at kind of what some of the benefits of that. Let's take a look at what that infrastructure looks like. I did not realize there's so much animation in the slides, but really architecture wise, when it comes to your end user, there's 3 components. There's the identity to authenticate, there's Intune for the management plane, and then for being able to access your resources, that's where that tunnel gateway provides that capability to have that connection. So once the policies are pushed down, once the identity is verified, then from there, we're able to connect into that network. So that device can be enrolled in MDM, or if you have unmanaged devices, those also have the ability to leverage this capability as well. So as we can see here of the infrastructure behind Microsoft Tunnel for deploying it in your environment, that's a high-level view from what you need as a checklist perspective. There are a number of requirements. This list might look a little bit daunting, but once you actually start to look at the breakdown for being able to have the prereqs, this is a little bit easier look. So being able to have a public and private internet or network connectivity, being able to have access to, or some sort of visibility into whether it be your on-prem or cloud resources through Azure, or on-prem just directly to that network. You can or cannot, depending on what your infrastructure looks like, leverage ExpressRoute. Both are supported. We can see what's required from a firewall perspective. We can leverage proxies as long as they're not authenticated. And then the installation does require a dedicated Linux VM and the simple command to be able to do that deployment. And then once we have Tunnel deployed within the environment, you can see there's a couple of commonly used commands that are here, as well as being able to look at the configuration files. Here are a couple of common places where, you're doing some of that troubleshooting on the Tunnel Linux VM or Linux server or Docker VM will be helpful for doing any sort of administration. And then from an end user perspective, configuring to push that down to the end user, we've got our app configuration policies, we've got our app protection policy for being able to leverage MAM, and then from an application perspective, at a minimum, here are what's required on the devices. And the company portal is the same reason that the company portal is needed on Android. It's just essentially the broker application that allows the device to talk to Entra ID for authentication. So to get started as an end user, that's what we need. And then from an experience perspective, I do not have a working demo, but I wanted to show you what some of the screenshots of that will look like. And Microsoft actually does have a nice little walkthrough for this as well that will allow you to kind of go through and see what that experience is. So walking through it, if I'm an end user and I've got Defender on my device, and then I go into Tunnel and I can see that I'm authenticated to my company's account. From there, once I am able to see that I am connected, I can go into Edge or any of the other Enlightened apps that are able to connect back through Tunnel. And then I can see that connectivity by way of an icon that's inside of Edge. And then from there, I can access internal resources within my environment. So then the nice thing about it is it does respect the boundaries between work and personal profiles. So if I were to switch over to my personal profile and I were to try to go into my web browser, I can then see that Tunnel is turned off because I'm not logged into that account. And if I try to access those resources, it will prevent me from access. So it does have that ability to not only look at it from a per app perspective, but a per profile perspective as well from a security perspective. So then if I switch back, then I have access to that application. So we talked about Cloud PKI, talked about Microsoft Tunnel for secure access to applications. How do we then take a step further and look at enhanced device operations and support? The first one is through leveraging a tool like Remote Help, being able to allow that secure access to allow your IT team access to help and support your end users built into that single platform that is Microsoft Intune, makes it a lot easier as well. Some of the common tools, BombGuard, which was purchased by BeyondTrust a few years back, TeamViewer, are some very common ones that we see our end users or our customers leveraging. Now being able to do that easily through the Intune portal, I can manage Windows, Mac, PC, and Android all from that one single portal. Being able to look at what's required from a configuration perspective. We've talked about the licensing. We can see the platforms that are supported. Sorry, no Linux, but it does support all of the other platforms. And being able to turn it on is actually pretty easy. Once you have that license, you just enable it for the tenant. You push down the policies, and then you ensure that either A, your users are given the help desk operations role, or B, you assign those individual RBAC permissions to them. And then the nice thing is we can then go into the portal to see what are some active sessions for activity within to see what our IT org is doing or how they're leveraging that tool and how many connections and how many sessions that they engaged in. But being able to launch it, it's very easy. It's that new remote assisted session button that's in the ellipses menu within Intune within each of those devices. As we saw, it's pretty easy just to turn that on and assign the roles and license the users. And then Microsoft has actually made it even much easier to push that out. I've got a blog that I had posted late last year on automating the process of adding that remote help application into your tenant. But gone are those days, thanks to the enterprise app catalog and being able to push that down easily to our end users. And then we just make sure that the end user is licensed for remote help as well. So you as an admin will need a remote help license, and your end users will also need a remote help license enabled on their account to be able to provide them support. And then being able to manage devices, a little bit of an eye chart here with some of the verbiage, but in terms of access for Windows and Mac, and that does include iOS, it does require someone to allow them to connect to the session. If they get a notification but they don't acknowledge it, you can retry. If they're not online, you'll get an error message, and then you'll have a warning banner as well if it's not connecting to a non-compliant device. Android, on the other hand, Microsoft did build to be able to allow it to be done unattendedly. So that way, if you're supporting devices that your frontline workers are using, you can access those very easily to be able to provide support as well. So what is the end user see on their end? So they get a notification, then they go and they click on that notification. If I'm the IT admin, I see this message for remote help. If I want to, once I'm finally connected, then I can allow the IT admin to view the screen, and then they see an experience very similar to this. Once they're connected, and this is where, let me go ahead and switch screens real quick, because this is pretty nice. So if I were to then go and wanted to take a look at what that experience is like, here's my Windows 365 PC. Let me see if I'm actually still connected. I don't think I am. Let's see. Yeah, the screen sharing has ended, unfortunately. So I did in that session, but it's actually really easy from an end user perspective. If I go in here to devices, and then if I wanted to go to my Windows 365 PC, I could access that. I could start that remote access session. And then generally within a few seconds, what will happen is it will start that sharing on their machine. I'll just let it sit here for a minute. As you can see here, less than 15 seconds, I got that notification. And then me as an IT admin, I can launch the remote help on my screen, which you won't be able to see, but I can show you, you'll be able to see from a end user perspective what that experience is like. Does it support multiple monitors? I have not tested it. That's a great question. I can definitely verify that by going the other way, since I do have a multiple monitor screen. But for the sake of time, I just wanted to kind of be able to show you what that end user experience is going to be. So I actually clicked to allow full control of the machine, and I'm waiting for that. I said, yes, I want to allow my IT admin to have full control. It does respect UAC. So and as part of that executable, it for a permissions perspective, is if we have it pushed down to the machine, then it will elevate those rights to be able to access for that end user. So what is Quick Assist? This actually is, there's a little more under the hood than your normal Quick Assist. But yes, it does actually leverage a lot of that same infrastructure. So I can go in here, I can open up a file. As you can see, it's going to show that I'm opening up that file and do that remotely to support that end user, and is able to kind of show what that experience looks like for the end user. From an administrator, I'll switch over here real quick just to show you. This is what the control pane looks like. So if I wanted to draw on the user screen, like that, and I could go here, I can draw and annotate on that end user screen. So that way, if I needed to help them and walk them through something and didn't want to necessarily do full control, I can do that pretty easily. So being able to have that capability right inside of the Intune portal by pushing out that remote help agent to end users is definitely a great time saver. And then looking at where we have, make sure I've got the right window shared, sorry about that. As we look at the taking this from a end user experience a step further, that's where the final component of the Intune suite really is around the endpoint analytics. For the sake of time, I'm just going to make note of what are some of the competitors that we've seen in the space that some of our customers have, and where this takes it a step further than being able to have just your normal endpoint analytics. So it allows us to look at anomalies. So being able to look at any sort of anomalous actions that are maybe within our environment and how many devices are detected, just in case maybe there's a software update or a driver update that is impacting our end users. We're able to see that easily in this pane of glass. The enhanced device timeline is very helpful as well. This is as you can see here, someone within my environment, not going to name any of my kids' names here, but they were playing a game and the Epic game launcher kept crashing. So this is a nice way to be able to look at that device timeline. It gives us some really nice battery health. So I can see from my particular machine the score for the battery on that same machine that one of my kids is using. It's got a score of 62, and I can see how much that timeline or that device runtime remains for that particular device. And then finally, we have device query. I think this is probably one of my favorite features of this is I can real time run a command using KQL against the machine, and it returns data real time. So you can leverage some of that same functionality through the Defender for Endpoint and some of the remote CLI that's there. This essentially just brings some of that capability right into the Intune portal to be able to run commands. And there's quite a few of them there that you can run from system info processes, system information, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, you can definitely, if you've got those commands, just to pop back over to my demo screen real quick for the final time. Wanted to be able to show you what some of those device query commands are that you can run. So if you wanted to take a look at the registry, a service, events, drivers, TPM, system info, anything that you could query through WMI is available right here, and you can run it on demand. So if I wanted to see, what was, I think the one that I had run there earlier, if I wanted to kind of look at my system info, I can go into here and I can run that right on demand. That would be very similar to if I were sitting at the machine and I were to open MS Info 32 and start to scour through that. Here's some of that high level information on the device as well. So being able to have real-time access to data on the machine also is a very invaluable tool that we get through some of the advanced analytics. So we went through, we took a look at all the different components of the Intune suite. And as a takeaway, this was probably one of my favorite exercises to do for putting together this deck, is looking at what are some of those comparative products that we see our customers using within their environments, and really how does that start to add up as we're thinking about Patch My PC. Maybe we're using CyberArk for PAM in our workforce. Maybe we're looking at a DigiCert PKI to have a managed PKI. What if we have Workplace One or Palo Alto, BombGuard licensing per admin or TeamViewer, and then some of the analytics. These all start to add up when you start to look at other products that are in your environment and being able to see how those per user, per device costs add up, and being able to have that one single suite with Intune Suite. If you do some of the math and look at some of the capabilities, there's definitely some potential cost savings, as well as, again, going back to that story of a single tool set with Intune definitely has some great value. And with that, I know we had a couple of extra questions. I think we touched on some of those. The quick assist and leveraging that for remote help is some of that licensing. The one question that was asked about being able to transfer files. I'm going to check on that here while we still have a few extra minutes. While I'm doing that, turn it over to Michelle to close us out. Unless there's any other questions, definitely appreciate you all being here today.
All right, awesome.